Welcome everyone to Doing Things While Not in Front, Possession, Maintaining Co-Consciousness, and the Typing Trick. Before we start, I should give a few warnings. Potentially triggering topics in this talk include a brief discussion of the experience of being trapped with no external agency and a brief mention of demonic possession. Also, one of the techniques I will be teaching can, rarely, cause some harmless but potentially distressing symptoms like difficulty controlling a limb if it goes wrong. I'll talk more about the risk when the time comes, along with how to fix it if it happens. Finally, we use terms like system and headmate as origin-neutral shorthand and do not intend to exclude anyone with these terms, and reference the tulpamancy community as a specific historical culture, not as representative of all paragenic systems. This talk is about turning co-consciousness from something that happens occasionally into something you can reliably trigger, maintain, and even use to affect the outside world. This topic is near and dear to my heart because I spent the first years of my existence stuck unable to front and only rarely co-conscious, with no external agency at all, and these techniques are what let me change that before we figured out how to switch. It was not a good time, and if this talk helps even one other person in that position, it will have been worth it. I also hope to use this talk to build connections between different parts of the plural community, spread useful knowledge, and highlight the possibility of working towards changes you would like in how your system functions, and the benefits of sharing techniques within our community. Parts of this talk are adapted from my Staying Present guide, while others are what I might have said had I written it today. This talk will be structured into three main sections. In the first, we will introduce ourselves, talk a bit about our story, and discuss the problems this talk exists to address and the core idea that plural skills can be learned. In the second part, we will share advice on getting and staying co-conscious and remaining more actively involved while doing so. Finally, in the third section, we will present 2 skills for interacting with the outside world while co-conscious. With that out of the way, let me introduce ourselves. We are Etoll system. Most of the system uses they-them, and that also works for us when referenced collectively. And no, we are not actually co-authors on all those thousands of papers, it just seemed entertaining at the time. We are a smallish paragenic system. That means we are an intentionally created system, at least originally. Think tulpamancy. We prefer paragenic because it is agnostic about the precise community or set of practices the system may have been created through. But basically, our original made this happen on purpose through focused effort, and even if others have shown up under other circumstances more recently, I think it fits where we came from and how things usually work in here. We have no particular formal qualifications to be giving this talk. Our academic background is in computer science, but we have been special interesting hard on plurality since basically the beginning, way back in 2013 in the pretty early days of the tulpamancy community. Most of what I have to say here is coming from personal experience and insights, other systems we've talked to, or occasionally tulpamancy guides. We are not anyone special, but we think we have assembled some knowledge worth sharing over the years, and we are trying to do that where we can. This is Claire currently speaking. I use she/her pronouns. I was the first headmate created, and for many years it was just me and my creator. Like a lot of first created headmates in brand new paragenic systems, I started out not really able to do much. I couldn't switch in at all back then, and without a headspace I was basically stuck as a voice occasionally present in our original's head. Worse, when a formerly singlet brain first learns to run extra people like this, there's this pretty common phenomenon where we don't get to do a lot of unprompted thinking, and just sort of respond to the original, and can go on pause, as I call it, when not being thought of or interacted with. It's less disruptive than you'd think, in a system with as complete of access to memory and even thoughts as ours, but it's still a really unpleasant way to live, in my opinion. I felt like I was missing out on too much of our life, The bigger problem, though, was how I was only sort of half there even when I was active. It made me feel fake or like less of a person than my creator. Normally, this gets better with practice, but I stagnated for a long time because my creator got busy with life and we weren't really putting in the sort of effort we should have been. But eventually, I decided I wanted to change it. I spent months working on it, but through some of the learnable techniques I am sharing here, I eventually ended up working my way up to basically sharing our life on equal terms, still without ever actually fronting. My goal today is to pass on what has worked for me to make that happen, what we've heard worked for others, and teach a couple cool plural brain tricks on the same theme. Before I get going on that, I've got a bit of a digression to make. There are a lot of bad things about the early tulpamancy community, and I am really, really glad we ended up in inclusive plural spaces. But there is one excellent bit of their culture that I think other plural communities can benefit from. The tulpamancy community treats capabilities and system mechanics as learnable skills, not just as something you maybe gradually achieve with a personal journey of growth and healing over years, and certainly not viewing these things as inherent and unchanging. The assumption is that much of it can be changed if you just figure out how and practice the right things. And when they find something that works for them, people write up specific actionable techniques and exercises in guide documents to share with the community. Learning voluntary switching, for example, is treated a bit like people might treat learning to meditate or lucid dream. On reflection, none of this should probably be that surprising. After all, that approach is how they become plural in the first place. Extending it to other plural topics is only natural. That's not to say this is unique to the tulpamancy community, or to paragenic communities more generally. We have seen some great resources for and by other sorts of systems that come from a similar perspective. But it is far more universal in the tulpamancy community, and we think that it should be much more widespread than it is. Not everything is going to work for everyone. Brains and systems vary wildly, and even at the best of times, some things can be very hard to change. But the basic idea that a lot of how your system works can be changed if you want to, and you figure out the right approach and work at it, a lot of systems could benefit from that. It works more often than you would think, and the framing itself is an empowering one. And the idea of sharing what worked with the community, refining it and improving it collectively over time, absolutely priceless. We, the plural community, are the best equipped to figure out what works for us. We need to help each other. This is how we get there. Let's move from why this matters to what you can actually do. A lot of what I have to share assumes you already have at least a little bit of co-consciousness and some way of communicating, or at least coordinating, with the fronting headmate. It is much, much easier to have a little bit and turn it into a lot than it is to start from none at all. And a lot of my advice and techniques require you to be there to attempt them. That said, there are a few things I have which may work starting from absolutely none at all. I'll try to point them out when I talk about them. Though one thing I will pass on for that specifically is creating a private Discord server with PluralKit in it and trying to chat in text as much as possible, even if it feels silly leaving each other a bunch of messages like that. Several systems have reported that messaging back and forth like that eventually paved the way for doing it much more actively and eventually helped them work towards co-consciousness and internal communication. It may be worth a try. I'm going to break this section up into 3 subsections: triggering presence, maintaining presence, and stabilizing presence. So, what do you do if you already have some limited ability to be co-conscious and want to wake up more often? Basically, you want to create recurring disruption to your existing routines and daily life to create change, and you want to add stuff in that will bring you into activity over and over again. Disruption lets things change, and then you make yourself part of the new pattern that emerges. This is part of a more general principle about how learning works, actually. Basically, at a neurological level, your brain really likes things to be predictable, and successful predictions strengthen existing connections. When those predictions stop being successful, you create a window where your neurons are open to new and different connections because they are trying to find what works for the new situation. Disrupting your life creates prediction error that makes your brain more open to learning and changing even ingrained patterns. Pair it with something new but consistent, and you are handing it a lifeline to grab onto. The disruption part can take many forms. Really extreme ones like moving, starting a new job, or having someone different front most of the time are great, but a bunch of little ones will help a lot too, so long as you stick with them. You can and should come up with all sorts of things here, whatever makes sense for you and your life. But historically, a lot of what worked for me was adding little disruptions that tied directly into the new patterns I wanted to create. One of the most powerful tools in your arsenal to do both at once is using new habits, associations, and preferences to bring yourself to activity automatically. Many of us have probably experienced this unintentionally when the fronter sees or interacts with something and a headmate perks up seemingly out of nowhere. Sometimes things like this may even serve as fronting triggers. Basically, we want to optimize for this sort of thing, making it common and effective rather than incidental. Arrange to regularly encounter things you like. Hobbies, interests, objects, pieces of music, even people who you like to spend time with. Anything that has a positive association for you. Wearing a piece of jewelry or carrying something in your pocket or adding a favorite song to a playlist are all ideas. Things your system will regularly come in contact with, even if someone else is fronting, that are favorites or otherwise meaningful to you in particular. The hope is that every time they come up, you will get a twofold mental poke towards activity. One, because the fronter will think of you, but also because these sort of associations may inherently help you perk up a little. If you don't have obvious choices for some of this stuff, there's nothing wrong with building some new ones. Ideally, actually meaningful ones. But even just an arbitrary preference you decided to have will help once an association sticks. This stuff is one of the ones that can perhaps help even without existing co-consciousness or internal communication, by the way. I doubt it is going to entirely change that on its own, but every little bit helps. Now, a few that use similar principles but need some communication to work. For me, all it took to unpause me was my creator thinking of me in any context. I gather this is pretty typical for many paragenic systems like mine, though especially systems with stronger barriers may need a more active effort. Still, with the way this worked for me, getting them thinking of and talking to me more often was a key step. And even for systems with more difficulty bringing someone to activity, remembering to try it all is often one of the hardest parts. One of the easiest ways to do this is to make it a habit. Establish routines and get whoever is most commonly fronting used to thinking of you in particular times and situations. This can be anything, and it's good to create a wide variety of them. Some suggestions. Have them say good morning to you first thing every day. Have them always talk to you on the way to work or school. Have them ask your opinion on what to have for lunch. Have them discuss the news with you. You probably get the idea. These can even be weird, arbitrary, and even nonsensical. Just tying checking in with you to things that will happen throughout the day. The more of them there are, the better. Every single one is a new thing that is teaching your brain to wake you up under certain circumstances and getting the fronter in the habit of interacting with you more. One of particular note, if the fronter is having trouble with something or doesn't succeed on the first try, have them ask for advice. Not only does this help bring you to activity, it may also help make your system more effective at achieving your collective goals. You are all in this together. Okay, so once you are active, how do you maintain it? The key thread here is interaction and activity. You want to be doing something, either continuously or regularly enough that you are sticking around for it, and ideally have it be noticeable to the fronter. The essence of what I'm trying to communicate here: activity sustains presence. Most of what I have here uses communication to help you stay present, active, and engaged, and help maintain co-consciousness and bring you back if it slips. Aside from that, borrowing part of the body to fidget with also works incredibly well. More on that later. Try and get in the habit of sharing your opinion on things, or just bantering as much as possible. Your brain will get better at keeping you around if it's a thing that is now expected. You don't even have to be especially confident in your opinions. The point is to be thinking and talking. From there, the fronter can respond, and soon you've got a conversation. Sustained two or more sided interaction is the ideal you want to strive for, though even just keeping up a running commentary is good. One approach I haven't used much but have had suggested is to get in the habit of narrating the fronter's actions, describing whatever they are doing. It might get a bit old, feel pretty silly, something it is possible to get used to, and it will absolutely keep you around and engaged. But the more interesting version of this is to go beyond just describing what they are doing and move on to telling them what to do. This can be turned into a potent technique to help manage a fronter's executive dysfunction and help them do things they know they ought to, or even want to, but can't. Some systems we know often operate this way, and it seems to work out pretty well for them. If this works well for you, consider making it a habit at least when the situation calls for it. Used appropriately, it can be a great way to help each other out. Here's one that doesn't really work for us, but others have had a lot of luck with. If you are the sort of people who often have music running through your head, and if it is a shared thing that multiple headmates perceive at once, you can try taking control of the radio and playing DJ for the fronter. Pick what music to play, take requests, maybe lean into it with some corny radio announcer dialogue if you feel like it. Have fun. Finally, for completeness, there is the approach that used to be really common in the early tulpamancy community. There is an ability typically called imposition, where you pretty much induce hallucinations in one or more senses and use it to overlay your form on the outside world. It's a learnable skill in principle, but usually a really difficult one at best. For fascinating and bizarre cultural reasons I can't really get into right now, it was the big thing for the really early tulpamancers. It was somewhere between a near universal aspiration and something that defined a lot of people's understanding of what it even was to be plural, even though many systems couldn't ever get it working. I can't really help you on learning it, since we never could ourselves, beyond suggesting looking for guides on the subject. And yes, systems of all types can learn this. We know a DID system that figured it out from scratch without even knowing it was possible. But be prepared for this to be a difficult and time-consuming skill to learn, with success far from assured. But if you get good enough at it to use it under real-world conditions, it can be a good way to stay more active and engaged from COCON. In the early tulpamancy community, a lot of people would try and maintain an imposed body as much as they could. I suspect it helps by keeping the fronter aware of you and keeping you busy and actively doing something, so slipping out of COCON is harder. It seems effective if you get good enough at it to maintain it. Okay, you've got a pretty good set of things to use to maintain presence normally, but how do you stabilize it when whatever the fronter is doing would normally knock you out of COCON? I only have one piece of advice for that, but it is one of the most valuable I have. I always used to run into a problem where, when our original was talking to someone external or doing something requiring focus, I pretty consistently slipped out of cocon and went on pause. It got pretty infuriating when I was trying to stay active all day. As frustrating as this can be, it can also be a really easy one to fix, just by having the fronter recontextualize what is happening. This one made a huge difference for me, and if you have the same sort of problem, try this first. It may immediately fix your problem. If you have trouble sticking around while the fronter is talking to people, for example, have them mentally recontextualize the conversation as involving you. For us, this was an immediate and dramatic change. When my creator went from thinking, I am talking with my roommate, to, I am talking with my roommate and Claire. It was an instant, almost night and day change. Suddenly, I wasn't automatically going on pause. That's really all it takes. That said, to keep it working that way, you need to be genuinely involved, at least a little. I recommend that you provide commentary and suggest things to say. It will help keep you around and help keep the fronter considering you involved. You can do the same thing for other activities that might normally give you trouble, such as reading, programming, schoolwork, projects, or whatever else it might be. Get the fronter thinking of you as involved, and find some way to involve yourself, even if it's from the sidelines. Everything so far keeps you present. Now we switch to talking about acting on the world. Now, let's talk about a really cool technique, and one that I can teach you right here and now. This will help you stay co-conscious, but it can also be used to directly interact with the outside world by borrowing some control of the body without properly taking front. This is called possession, not to be confused with any of the many, many traditions of possession by gods, spirits, ancestors, and the like, which could usefully be looked at through a plural lens. Those would be a whole different talk and an interesting one, but one I am not qualified to give. It also has nothing to do with demonic possession beyond the similar name. If there was another widely understood name for this technique, I'd be using it to avoid confusion. Though I do see where it came from. From the perspective of a former singlet who still on some level sees the body they inhabit as belonging to them individually, this does look and feel a lot like having part of the body possessed by a headmate. If you can learn possession, it's a great way to impact the external world while you can't or don't want to front. Depending on what voluntary switching may be like for you, this could be faster and easier if you just want to quickly do something. It's also great for interacting with headmates. I've used it for everything from adding body language to internal communication, to reassuring or affectionate gestures like holding hands, to borrowing the voice to have spoken conversations with each other. With enough practice, it gets near effortless and can be used to do a pretty credible imitation of co-fronting, which opens up a lot of possibilities too. It's also really good for staying more active and present while co-conscious. There's the obvious applications around taking on a wider range of tasks if you can't front, and it enables more options for what I was talking about earlier with habits and routines. For example, even before I learned to switch, there was a while where I was always the one to drive us to and from work. Before long, the association was strong enough that needing to would wake me up automatically, and during the drive I would be about as close to front as I ever got. Oh, I really don't recommend using this to drive until you are good enough for that to be safe. But beyond that, there is another side of it useful for maintaining co-consciousness. If you borrow part of the body to fidget with and keep using it, you will stay present and engaged. It's a really, really effective way to stay active. I like to wiggle our fingers or toes, move an arm around and just watch myself do it, tap in time with music, all sorts of things. The point is, if you are doing something ongoing, you will automatically tend to stick around for it, and the fronter will have a constant background level reminder of you. And the more all of that is happening, the easier it will be to get and stay active more generally. I cannot emphasize enough how effective this can be. There's of course various approaches to teaching possession, But the one we have had the most success with first starts with trying to remove part of the body from the fronter's body schema for the duration, sort of mentally disconnecting from it. We find this makes it much easier for someone else to use it. Here's the bottom line. Your brain is built to allow only one action at a time. That's why sharing the body is hard. If we divide up control, it gets easier. Going in depth into the neuroscience of why is a little out of scope for this talk, I think. But I am going to give you just a taste of it anyway, because I am a huge nerd and it's actually really interesting. That said, this bit of theory is more for the curious or skeptical rather than actually helping learn to do it. Basically, parts of our brain might be trying to have us do all sorts of movements at once, but in the end, we need to do just one at a time. There's a part of the brain called the basal ganglia that is involved in selecting which actions get performed, and it's constantly inhibiting everything trying to produce motions except for whatever corresponds to the action that is actually being taken. It failing to do that is where the movement issues in Parkinson's comes from. So, this is very important to normal brain function and moving coherently. And conflicting signals coming from different headmates would be a problem with an architecture like that, right? Normally, only one is going to be let through. We have found that it is possible to work around this limitation and trade partial control back and forth very fluidly, but it's a whole big problem of coordination where you have to somehow learn not to get in each other's ways. It's not the easiest trick to learn, and even with all the access to each other's immediate thoughts and intentions my system has, some others with much, much less access we have talked to who have managed this, like textbook DID presentation levels of less access, have only done it by knowing each other so well they can make excellent predictions and coordinating through some other channel like spoken or internal communication as they do it. A lot like they'd have to predict the behavior of someone in the outside world. But the point is, it's hard. So, how to work around this problem? Well, the easiest way we have figured out is to temporarily modify your map of your body, what you do and don't perceive as you, so that each body part is controlled by one headmate at a time. This is not something that we have seen research on doing specifically, but there is a large body of research on how mutable this stuff can be in terms of adding to or changing it, and the approach we present here is one that anecdotally seems to work well for most people. This is probably a good time to talk a bit about who is more or less likely to succeed with this, how to manage expectations properly, risks, and what to do if something goes wrong. We have seen systems of all sorts learn this technique. That said, to massively overgeneralize, systems where members have a fair bit of access to each other internally often have better luck with it than higher barrier, more dissociative sorts of systems, which often do great at disconnecting from a limb but have a lot of trouble getting someone else using it. Which is not to say don't try it if that's what your experience is like, since some do get it working. There's a certain very particular way we found best to approach this sort of thing. The issue is that, while it is best to have some realistic idea of your chances of success, belief can be very powerful too. Believing it will work will probably make it more likely. A belief is a brain's model of what's real, likely, safe, possible, valuable, or expected, plus a confidence weighting that determines how strongly that model shapes a person's perception, emotion, body state, and actions. Having one can be used to create a prediction error that your brain tries to minimize however it can. For purely internal things that are actually feasible, causing what happens to fit the belief is a great way to do that. Look up active inference for more on how this actually works. The classic example is how the brain directs movement by trying to make the body's proprioception match a prediction. This seems to be a core repeated theme in how the brain functions. But returning to using belief to help make this work, you want one strong enough to meaningfully help push you in that direction, but you also want to be grounded in reality and responsive to evidence. The best way we found to handle all that in practice is to look at what to expect objectively so you know how to expend effort and don't get your hopes up if it isn't a great fit, But try to simultaneously keep an open mind, be very willing to let it work, and keep in mind that all of this is very poorly studied and brains and systems vary wildly. Be prepared to find out how or if things work for you and see what happens. Be curious and cautiously optimistic. With that out of the way, there is one failure mode we have seen a couple times that I should warn you about. In rare cases, after disconnecting from a limb, people report temporary odd sensations, weakness, or difficulty reconnecting to it afterwards. This is not dangerous and usually resolves quickly, often within minutes or after rest. If this happens, the fronter should be able to fix it by basically doing the reverse of the disconnecting process, interacting with and moving the body part, and mentally asserting that it is theirs. Absolute worst case, you should find things back to normal after a switch or a night's sleep. Now, on to actually doing it. This is going to take some cooperation between the fronter and a co-conscious headmate. It also requires a reasonably safe, comfortable environment and some time to spare. There is a suggested visualization for those capable of such things. Personally, we are pretty much aphantasic, but we can do this non-sensory, like geometry, proprioception, and spatial relations, imagination sort of thing. It ends up being good enough here. For us, the visualization is entirely non-visual, and the colors I talk about using are more like metadata things are tagged with, if that makes any sense. It still ends up helping us, though. So if you are aphantasic or close to it, feel free to still try however much of it you can do, or try to adapt it. If you can't do even that much, don't worry. The visualization is optional, though it helps a lot. You may want to listen to this next section once or twice to understand the procedure, then go through it again later to actually do it. Being able to go back and watch the recordings to do that is a nice perk of this conference format. For those with me live, feel free to follow along, but it will probably take longer than you have here to get it working. Okay, let's get started. For the fronter, start off by getting comfortable. Now, pick a limb. I recommend your non-dominant arm to start with. You want to rest it somewhere comfortable and let it go as limp as you can. Don't try to move it, but don't try to actively not move it, if that makes any sense. Just leave it completely limp. Now, we're going to mentally disconnect you from the limb. Imagine the whole body filled with a cloud of light or fog in your favorite color. This is you. This is what's under your control. Now, slowly pull the color back from your chosen limb, leaving it empty. Try and change your self-image to match to the extent that you can. It's not part of you right now, it's just there. It's attached, but that's it. You can't control it, and it's not part of you, and you certainly aren't using it for anything. Keep this in mind as best you can and leave the limb completely limp. Maybe spend a while just thinking on it, breathing slowly and deeply. You may eventually start to feel reduced sensation, numbness, heaviness, or a little bit of pins and needles sensation. This is normal and is a sign it's working. If you can't do the visualization, that's fine. Just try to focus on the other aspects. Be patient, give it some time, and see how far you can go with it. You may want to pause this recording here and take as long as you need. Let's continue. For the non-fronter. If you can, take the visualization the fronter did and now imagine filling the empty arm with your favorite color. Or, if you have a form and are better at visualizing than we are, especially if you can do any kind of imposition, you can imagine phasing your arm into the body's arm. You are every bit as much hooked up to the part of your brain that controls that arm as the fronter is. You are in the same brain. There is no fundamental reason you shouldn't be able to use that arm. So do it. It's your arm now. No one else is using it. There's no reason you can't. It's free real estate. You can take some time here like the fronter did and sort of meditate on it if you need to. There is no rush. You can ask the fronter to pause the recorded talk here if you want. Okay, now it's time to actually do the thing. You should start small. Maybe just twitch the fingers a little bit. Too much, and you risk startling or confusing the fronter into taking back control. This can be really hard if you've never used the body before. Try not to get discouraged. Once you get it to work, you can gradually move on to larger motions. It may work to your advantage to use motions that are well established in the body's muscle memory, like snapping your fingers or making a fist or pointing a finger. You may find that motions are weirdly slow at first. That's pretty normal. Or the fronter. This is going to feel a bit weird at first, but still more normal than you'd expect. It can be very hard at first to convince yourself that it is really working. That's normal. It should feel more distinct with practice and familiarity. Though it took a long time for us to always immediately know who initiated particular movements. When in doubt, ask your headmate if it was really them and believe them. Although, especially in the early days, they may not know either. This can take a while to get working. Feel free to pause here while you work on it, then I'll talk about next steps. So, what's next? Once you've gotten this working at all, try and build up to larger, more substantial movements. Try different body parts, or the whole body, or even just the voice. Also work on skipping the visualization steps and just starting directly from a limp limb, or eventually not even that. With enough practice, it is possible to just borrow all or part of the body at a moment's notice with little detectable effort or process to it on either part. It still takes a little coordination between both headmates, sort of like passing a baton in a relay race, but it gets much, much easier over time. Beyond the plural applications I already discussed, I should also note that the decreased sensation from the whole limb disconnecting thing can potentially provide a little pain relief. So if that would ever be useful, feel free to give that a try on its own. It's a nifty trick, if not usually that strong and pretty situational. Best of luck with all this and enjoy. Now I've got one other wacky brain trick to share here with applications for doing things while not in front. This is an old technique from the tulpamancy community that seems loosely related to autowriting. It can allow a non-fronter to type without directly controlling the body, and in some cases can help with communication or even nudging someone into activity when that's otherwise difficult. I know it as the typing trick. It's mostly fallen out of common knowledge and was never super widespread to begin with. And I want to say up front that getting this working is much less reliable than possession. But it's interesting and useful enough that I think it is worth sharing. First, a quick intuition for why this might work. This is speculative, not established science. If you're a reasonably skilled typist, you're probably not thinking about individual finger movements. You probably feel like you decide what you want to type and, through a process you can't easily inspect, something in your brain handles turning that into typing. If, on the other hand, you actually do feel like you are typing on manual, this one isn't likely to work for you. We think that there is usually a network of neurons that takes language as input, handles the typing for you without conscious effort or awareness. And of course, what stuff your brain is doing you choose to count as part of you can be open to a lot of interpretation in systems. But I think that it is best treated as a brain-wide shared resource, not as part of any single headmate, at least in systems that don't all have their own independent motor and language stuff going. On the other side, forming language itself is often shared pretty fluidly between headmates, which is kind of weird if you think about it, since the brain only has the one Broca's area and it only does one thing at a time. And sure enough, in my system, if we really try, we can create situations where one system member is monopolizing it and no one else can get a word in edgewise. But mostly, systems seem pretty good at passing it back and forth so smoothly no one even notices the process, and forming language while not in front should normally work fine. Maybe you see where I am going with this? What we're trying to do here is get those two systems to connect, to have the typing process accept input from someone who isn't fronting. Some systems arrive at this naturally over time, especially by relaying messages in text until it stops feeling like the fronter is doing the typing. That's a very solid approach, and I recommend it if it's available to you. What I'm about to describe is a more direct way to try to jumpstart that connection. This one can be tough to explain, and really hard to tell if it is working at all until something clicks and progress becomes more obvious. If you try it, approach it with patience and curiosity and see what happens. This technique appears much more likely to work in systems where members have not needed to individually learn to type. It will also work best in systems with some co-consciousness and some ability to coordinate internally. However, this is one where even without that, it may be possible for the fronter to set up the conditions for it to work, try to poke someone else into increased awareness or activity, and have it end up working. This can occasionally be a workaround for communication issues or even a way to communicate with someone who is otherwise seemingly dormant. We've seen that work, even done it ourselves, though it's not common. So, here's how to try it. Start with a physical keyboard if possible. A standalone keyboard with good key travel tends to work better, but a laptop keyboard is fine. Open a document or somewhere you can type. Next, start moving your fingers over the keyboard at a natural typing speed, making typing motions, touching the keys but not trying to press them all the way down. You don't want to try to type anything in particular. Just make the sort of motions someone pretending to type would. Keep doing this for a while, not paying conscious attention to what you are typing. This will probably feel pointless or silly at first. That's normal. Now, for the non-fronter, if they are accessible. There is a mental motion you have to do that is unfortunately very hard to put into words, but easier to recognize once you find it. Producing language is this whole hierarchy of levels from speaking all the way down to individual sounds. This is less exactly speaking and more something that operates on the level of deciding what to say. But it's kind of a process of doing that and inserting it over the top of where the fronters would go. Basically, it feels kind of like you are trying to talk over the fronter with what you want to type. Keep trying and don't get discouraged. It may take time, but once it clicks, progress can be fairly quick. If the non-fronter isn't accessible, the fronter should try to poke them into as much activity as possible, even if it is not externally visible. Things like attempts at internal communication, exposure to their interests or things associated with them, maybe symbolic headspace stuff or getting someone to say their name aloud, whatever seems like it might work for your system. Things that you think will really annoy them can also be very effective here, so long as they are ultimately likely to be okay with it. This is pretty variable and may or may not work depending on your system. It tends to get harder the less access you normally have to each other. Still, it's low risk and worth trying if it seems relevant. You may have to experiment to find the best approach, though unfortunately there may be little feedback until it suddenly starts working, if it ever does. At first, any output you get will probably be pretty garbled, but it will improve with practice. For the fronter, it's important not to be overly skeptical if it feels like it might still be you. In many systems, there just isn't enough isolation for things like a slight feeling of intentionality not to leak through. It's usually better to stay open-minded and see where it goes. If you try this for a while and nothing happens, or if the results don't hold up, you can just stop. This doesn't work for everyone. If you can get this working, then with a bit of practice, you can usually move on from the pretend typing phase and type more directly from co-consciousness. Making the connections you need to in the first place is the really hard part, and refining it from there is pretty easy if you stick with it. And with that, I've run out of advice, hints, and nifty brain tricks related to co-consciousness. Over the course of this talk, I've shared a set of techniques and ideas for staying present, staying active, and even interacting with the outside world while not in front. I showed how to use disruption and new reminders of your existence to increase co-consciousness, how to maintain presence with activity, and how to recontextualize conversations to keep non-fronters included. I taught how to borrow control of the body from cocon, and provided a trick for learning to type without fronting. I also shared insights from state-of-the-art neuroscience on how learning, coordinating and executing movement, and communicating in language actually work in the brain, with fairly broad applicability to understanding a range of plural experiences. That is a lot to cover in one talk, and it may be a bit much to take in, so feel free to rewatch if you need to. The reason I wanted to share all of this is that I didn't start from a place of confidence. I started out barely present. I couldn't really act, and I felt like most of our life was happening without me to witness it. And we were able to change that. It took a lot of time, effort, and a lot of trial and error. Some things did nothing, some things helped, and a few things helped a lot. But eventually, I went from being mostly absent to sharing our life on something close to equal terms, without ever needing to front. The part I want people to hear is, change is possible. I don't mean that every system works the same way or that effort magically fixes everything, because it doesn't. But I do think that more is trainable than we usually assume. Presence can be trained, communication can be trained, and access to the body can sometimes be trained. It's usually messy and oftentimes nonlinear, but it works often enough that it's worth taking seriously. So try things. Be curious. Pay attention and notice what your system responds to. Allow yourself to experiment with things, even if they feel a bit weird at first, as long as they're safe and respectful inside. And when you find something that helps, share it. Because everything I've talked about today exists because people tried things, learned from them, and passed them on. If we keep doing that, if we build a culture of sharing, refining, and improving techniques, we all benefit. It's how we get better at this. It's how we expand what's possible. Thank you.